Good morning, AWS, and welcome to the AWS Morning Brief. I am cloud economist Corey Quinn, and today is the last day you can buy the Last Week in AWS charity t-shirt. There are two versions, one properly pronouncing AMI with 3 syllables, and the improper version pronouncing it AMI for $10 more because there is a cost to being wrong. Pick up yours today and today only at snark.cloud/charity shirt. This episode has been sponsored by Influx Data, the creators of InfluxDB. InfluxDB is like Amazon TimeStream except for the part where it has paying customers. In addition to being actually available for sale, it is also the gold standard of time series databases. They've got a time series database and several other products available as open source, as well as via managed service offerings. Check them out at influxdata.com, and my thanks to them for sponsoring this ridiculous podcast. Now, what happened last week in AWS? Amazon Cognito increases CloudFormation support, and honestly, there was really nowhere for it to go but up. Now you don't have to have Lambda functions that hit API endpoints in order to make federated identities and user pools work together. What a concept. Also, speaking of CloudFormation support for things, Amazon EventBridge now supports CloudFormation. Just shy of 3 months after going generally available, EventBridge becomes something you can actually use for responsible serverless deployments instead of just screwing around with it in the console. Amazon Kinesis Data Firehose adds cross-account delivery to Amazon Elasticsearch service as a number of Amazon services are starting to become aware of the new move towards multiple accounts. This shouldn't be noteworthy, but it is. Amazon Pinpoint adds support for message templates. It's nice to see Pinpoint come out of its long hibernation. Someday, people might even listen to these podcast updates about it without having to double check to see whether Amazon Pinpoint is real or a service that I made up just to see who'd call me out on it. Amazon RDS enables detailed backup storage billing. In other words, now, rather than having a giant amorphous blob of RDS storage, you can tie that back to the instance that it came from. This is important and blindingly obvious, which is why it only took almost a decade for it to show up. Amazon RDS for Postgres supports minor versions 11.5, 10.10, 9.6.15, 9.5.19, 9.4.24, none of which anyone cares about, and adds transportable database feature, which is actually newsworthy, and by putting it into the same headline, they forced me to read those previous minor version updates. Well played, Amazon. Amazon Redshift introduces AZ64. It's not a new availability zone, it's a new compression encoding for optimized storage and high query performance. This also sunsets a previous Amazon statement that there was no compression algorithm for experience. Amazon Textract is now a HIPAA-eligible service, which is super awesome for the world of medical transcription and super awful for people whose job is medical transcription. Amazon VPC traffic mirroring now can be set up inside of CloudFormation. Huzzah! Once again, you are saved from having to click around inside of the terrible, terrible web console. Application load balancers and network load balancers add new security policies for forward secrecy with more stringent protocols and ciphers. In other words, check the box and don't worry about it. And for God's sake, don't implement your own crypto. AWS Chatbot now supports notifications from AWS Config. Do you ever wonder about the ephemeral nature of reality? About what it all means, where we're all going, and why we only ever have these deep conversations at times like this in the middle of the night? By the way, you have an unencrypted EBS volume in your AWS account. For God's sake, Slackbot, it's 3 a.m. Go to sleep. The AWS Console mobile application, yes it exists, launches federated login for iOS. I already tested this one and it works out super well. I'm pleasantly surprised. It just needs a hell of a lot better coverage of various services before it's something I'll actually use for things. AWS Direct Connect announces a resiliency toolkit to help customers order resilient connectivity to AWS. So you can now easily have multiple connections to your single server in a rack with a dodgy power supply. Box checked. AWS Firewall Manager now supports management of Amazon VPC security groups, and you can also now get a talk about VPC security groups accepted to the RSA conference because you can use the word firewall in the title. AWS IoT Core adds the ability to retrieve data from DynamoDB using Rule SQL. And no, shrieks the DynamoDB team. It's called NoSQL for a reason. Meanwhile, I'm over here using Route 53 as a database very happily and chortling. The AWS Snowball Edge now supports offline software updates for Snowball Edge devices in air-gapped environments. To begin the process of updating your Snowball Edge, please insert floppy disk 1 of 67,000. Amazon Elasticache launches self-service updates for Memcache and Redis cache clusters. Awesome. You can now decide when things get updated rather than them doing it for you, you discovering a misconfiguration, and your entire site crashes into the sea because it turns out you weren't pointing at the primary, but rather the replica, and then a write happens on a weekend. That's a very specific exception case. I wonder who that could have happened to. This episode has also been sponsored by Chaos Search. Anything that involves running Elasticsearch yourself is god-awful because it winds up pairing storage and compute. Chaos Search gets away from that. The compute lives inside of containers, and the storage is S3. It still provides a binary-compatible Elasticsearch API without having to deal with all of the technical pain of running Elasticsearch yourself. It also avoids the political pain of deciding between Amazon's terrible managed Elasticsearch service, running your own Elasticsearch service, running Elastic Cloud, or rolling your own on top of AWS's open distro for Elasticsearch. It also lets you steer completely free of the slap and tickle fight that Amazon and Elastic are currently going through in court. Thank you to Chaos Search for their support of this newsletter. If you'd like to learn more, visit chaossearch.io. Speaking of the pain of running large things at scale, there are new instance families because of course there are. Introducing Amazon EC2, M5N, M5DN, R5N, and R5DN instances, which feature 100 gigabits per second of network bandwidth each. Because that's what it takes to run large things at scale, incredibly capable single instances. There are new public datasets available from Audi, MIT, Allen Institute for Cell Science, the Finnish Meteorological Institute, and others. And I'm not even going to snark about that because these are important public datasets, and the fact that they are available for our use on AWS is pretty awesome, all things considered. I love the fact that they're doing this, and I'd love to see more of it. There are new training courses available to teach new APN partners to better help their customers, and these courses are great. I love that they cover important topics, including don't spit on customers, only insult the customer behind their back, and if AWS didn't see it, you didn't do it. They've also made new EC2 high memory instances available with up to 24 terabytes of memory each. They're purpose-built to run large in-memory databases like SAP HANA. I'm not going to lie here. I struggle to imagine a world in which needing 24 terabytes of RAM for a single instance to run a single application makes that application seem like anything that is not complete garbage. Amazon EKS Windows container support is now generally available. Terrific. You can run a managed Kubernetes service with Windows. Everyone's been asking for that because everything is terrible. Speaking of exciting instances that are becoming available, bare metal ARM-based EC2 instances. Finally, you have the right to bare metal ARMs. There's an updated white paper available, Navigating GDPR Compliance on AWS. Somehow, this white paper is only 32 pages long, so I assume it's a relatively quick read on how to change your identity and flee the country if the GDPR folks come knocking. Ha ha ha! I'm kidding, GDPR enforcement body. I obey it scrupulously. Please don't come after me. And lastly, after many rounds of heckling and keynotes, Amazon has formally articulated their positions on a number of hot-button political issues. I'm not saying I agree with all of them, but I think it's a welcome change that they are taking a public stance on anything. They've stayed away from this for a long time, and in the absence of telling their own story, others will tell it for them. So I do want to laud them for taking the time to do that. And that's all of substance that happened last week from AWS. I'm cloud economist Corey Quinn, based here in San Francisco, solving for the horrifying AWS bill wherever I happen to find them. You can find out more about what I do at lastweekinaws.com. My thanks again to Chaos Search and Influx for sponsoring this podcast, and I'll talk to you next week.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.